You won't believe what happened to me. Imagine buying land fair and square, paying your taxes, and minding your business, only to wake up one day and realize an HOA built an entire neighborhood, 96 homes, on your property. That's exactly what happened. But instead of rushing to stop them, I let them finish building every single house. And when the time was right, I pulled the deed out in court and turned their world upside down. It all began with a large piece of land I bought years ago on the edge of town. At the time, it didn't look like much to anyone else. Just an open stretch of dirt and wild grass, sitting quietly on the outskirts where the city's pavement faded into gravel roads. To me, though, it was an investment. I saw potential where others saw nothing. I made sure every bit of paperwork was in order, title, deed, boundaries, all carefully filed and protected. And every single year, without fail, I paid the property taxes. I didn't build anything on it, didn't try to flip it, didn't even fence it off. It was just my quiet piece of land, a patch of earth I owned outright, legally and cleanly. For years, it sat there untouched, almost forgotten by the world. Sometimes, I drive by just to check on it. I'd park my car, step out, and let the silence sink in. The land stretched wide under the sky, wind sweeping across the tall grass, the smell of dirt and weeds filling the air. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't flashy, it was just mine. That was enough for me. But then, fast forward a few years, everything changed. One morning, while heading to town, I decided to swing past my property like I always did. But this time, instead of calm emptiness, I was greeted by chaos. Trucks lined the roadside, their heavy engines growling. Cranes towered over the horizon like mechanical giants. Construction workers in neon vests shouted orders, hammering, drilling, pouring cement. Dust clouds filled the air, mixing with the sharp scent of fresh asphalt and wet concrete. At first, I froze. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Was this a city project? Maybe the county had started building a road or laying utilities. That would have been strange, sure, but at least it might have made some kind of sense. I parked my car at the edge of the site, stepped out, and squinted against the dust. The sound of jackhammers rattled my chest. A line of foundation trenches cut deep into the dirt, my dirt. Wooden frames for houses were already going up. The workers moved with speed and precision, like this had been planned for months. I walked closer, weaving through the noise and movement, trying to get the attention of someone in charge. "Excuse me," I called out to one of the workers. "What's going on here?" He barely glanced at me, sweat dripping down his forehead. "New subdivision," he grunted, before turning back to his task. "Subdivision? On my land?" My stomach tightened. I stepped back, my heart pounding. That's when I saw it, the sign. A big, bold banner staked into the ground near the entrance. New homes by the Lakeside HOA, starting at $450,000. For a moment, my jaw literally dropped. My brain struggled to piece it together. The HOA, a homeowners association, on my land. They weren't just putting a road or a utility line. They weren't just testing the ground. They were building an entire community, a whole subdivision, 96 homes, as I would later learn. I stared at that sign like it was mocking me. The letters gleamed in the sunlight, bold and proud, as if declaring, "This is ours now." But it wasn't. It was mine. I stood there, surrounded by the roar of machinery and the clatter of construction, feeling invisible. Nobody acknowledged me. Nobody asked who I was or why I was there. To them, I was just some bystander watching progress unfold. But inside, a storm was brewing. Memories of all those years, keeping the paperwork clean, flashed in my mind. The deed tucked away safely. The taxes I paid faithfully, even when times were tough. The quiet pride I felt whenever I thought about owning a piece of land free and clear. And now, without warning, without permission, without even the courtesy of a conversation, this HOA had invaded it. I took another step back, trying to steady my breathing. The absurdity of it all hit me like a punch in the gut. They weren't even hiding it. They weren't sneaking in at night or fencing off small corners. No, they had rolled in with cranes and bulldozers, throwing up signs, advertising houses, and planning ribbon-cutting ceremonies. They acted like they owned it, like I had never even existed. I remember standing there, dust swirling around my shoes, thinking, this has to be a mistake. Maybe there was a clerical error. Maybe they bought land nearby and got the boundaries wrong. Surely no one would be bold or stupid enough to build an entire neighborhood on land that didn't belong to them, right? But deep down, something told me it wasn't just a mistake. It was arrogance. Because that's what HOAs thrive on, isn't it? Power, control, the belief that they can bend rules and people to their will. They had looked at my empty land, assumed it was up for grabs, and claimed it without ever checking the truth. And now, here I was, the actual owner, standing in the middle of their so-called project, invisible to them, yet holding the one thing they didn't expect anyone to have, the deed. I stood there longer than I should have, just watching in disbelief. Wooden frames rose where wild grass once swayed. Trucks rumbled across the ground I had quietly protected for years. Workers hammered nails into beams, oblivious to the fact that they were trespassing with every strike. And me, my jaw was still dropped, my fists clenched, my mind racing. The HOA had started building an entire subdivision on my land, and they had no idea what kind of storm was about to hit them. When I first approached the construction site, I was still trying to wrap my head around what was happening. I walked up cautiously, weaving past the trucks and piles of lumber, waving to a few of the workers. "Hey," I said loudly over the hammering and drilling. "What's going on here?" One of the workers, a guy in a hard hat with a streak of cement across his shirt, barely looked at me. He wiped sweat from his brow, gave me a quick glance, and muttered, "Subdivision project. Lakeside HOA." Then, without another word, he turned back to his task like I was invisible. I tried again, louder this time. "Wait, who gave you permission to build here? This is private property." Another worker, this one driving a forklift, glanced at me for half a second before shrugging. "Talk to the boss," he said, motioning toward a temporary trailer office at the edge of the site. So I marched toward the trailer, my heart pounding. Every step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I knocked firmly. A man inside shouted, "Come in." The trailer smelled of stale coffee and paperwork. Maps, blueprints, and permits were spread across a folding table. A tall man in a polo shirt leaned back in his chair, phone in hand, his boots kicked up casually on the table like he owned the world. His face broke into a smirk the second he saw me. "You the guy causing all the commotion outside?" he asked, not even bothering to stand. "I'm not causing commotion," I said firmly. "This is my land. I own it. I have the deed. What's going on here?" The man chuckled, leaning forward. "Your land? That's rich. Hate to break it to you, buddy, but this property belongs to the HOA now. Has for years. We've got all under control." The way he said it, so casual, so smug, made my blood boil. "What do you mean it belongs to the HOA?" I snapped. "I've paid the taxes every single year. I have the paperwork, the original deed. You can't just—" Before I could finish, he laughed. A loud, dismissive laugh that echoed through the trailer like I had just told the funniest joke in the world. He leaned back again, shaking his head. "You must be confused," he said with mock sympathy. "See, we acquired this land a long time ago. Maybe you missed the memo. Maybe you think you've got some old paper lying around that says otherwise. But trust me, it doesn't matter. This is HOA property now. We've got developments planned, homes already sold, money invested. You've got no say in the matter." The arrogance dripping from his voice nearly made me choke. My hands curled into fists at my sides. "Listen carefully," I said, my voice low but steady. "You're building on my land. You don't own this property. I do. If you bother to check the county records, you'd know that." For a moment, his smirk faltered, but then, just as quickly, it returned, sharper than before. "County records," he scoffed. "We don't need to check anything. We've got maps, we've got agreements, we've got investors lined up. You think waltzing in here with some dusty deed makes you the boss? No, you're just some nosy neighbor trying to stir up trouble. And let me warn you, HOA doesn't take kindly to troublemakers." I blinked. Did he really just say that? What did you just call me? He stood then, finally, and jabbed a finger toward me. His voice was sharper now, tinged with anger. I called you a trespasser, because that's what you are. This is HOA property. You have no right to be here. And if you keep walking around this site, getting in the way, we'll fine you. That's how it works. HOA rules apply here. You're standing on our land. The absurdity of it hit me so hard, I almost laughed in his face. Here was a man, standing on my land, surrounded by my soil, my air, my property lines, and he had the audacity to tell me I was trespassing? You're joking, I said slowly, shaking my head. Not at all, he replied smugly. If you're not out of here in 5 minutes, I'll have security escort you off HOA grounds. Next time, maybe think twice before interfering with projects bigger than you. That's when it all clicked. Their arrogance, their sloppy paperwork, their absolute refusal to even glance at the truth. They were digging their own grave, and they didn't even know it. Because here's the truth, they had messed up. Big time. The maps they were using? Outdated. Old survey lines, drawn years before I purchased the property. The agreements they claimed to have? Shady backroom deals with developers who never bothered to confirm ownership. The whole project was built on assumptions, not facts. They never checked the county records, never verified who actually held the deed. They just assumed the land was already theirs, that no one would question them, that no one had the nerve or the legal proof to stand in their way. And now, when the rightful owner finally stood in front of them, they brushed me off like I was nothing. I looked the project manager dead in the eye and said, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." He smirked again, confident, unbothered. "We'll see about that." That smug smile would haunt him later, I knew it, because in that moment, I made a silent promise. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to fight him right then and there. No, I was going to let them keep building, keep pouring their money, keep digging themselves deeper into the pit of arrogance they had created. Because when the time came, I had something far more powerful than threats or fists. I had the deed. I had the law. And they had nothing but their own hubris. So I turned, walked out of the trailer, and left the site with dust clinging to my shoes and anger burning in my chest. They thought they had silenced me, brushed me aside like some pesky insect. But really, they had just handed me the perfect opportunity. They thought I was a trespasser, but in reality, they were the ones trespassing. And sooner or later, that truth was going to bury them. Now, I could have stopped them right there. I could have marched straight into court, slammed my fist on the table, and filed an injunction to freeze their entire operation. One phone call to the county office, one motion in front of a judge, and their shiny new subdivision would have screeched to a halt. The bulldozers would have been silenced, the workers sent home, the investors panicking. But something inside me whispered, wait. Why? Because I realized very quickly that the more they built, the deeper they dug themselves into a trap. Every concrete foundation they poured wasn't just a house, it was a dollar sign. Every wall that went up was money out of their pockets, sunk into property they didn't own. Every family that signed a contract, every piece of landscaping they installed, every streetlight they put in, was another nail in their own coffin. If I shut them down early, sure, I'd save myself stress. But then they could claim ignorance, maybe offer a small payout, maybe wriggle out of responsibility. No, I didn't want them escaping. I wanted them cornered, with nowhere to run. So I made a decision. I would let them keep building. That choice became my quiet weapon. Instead of fighting them head-on, I slipped into the shadows and watched as they spent millions on what was essentially my property. I didn't protest. I didn't complain. I didn't even tell my neighbors what was going on. The less attention I drew, the more confident the HOA became. They thought they had silenced me. They thought I was powerless. But in reality, I was sharpening my sword behind the curtain. Meanwhile, I made sure my side of the paperwork was airtight. Every year, like clockwork, I walked into the county office and paid my property taxes. The clerk knew me by name at that point. Still holding on to that big stretch of land, she would ask. And I'd smile and say, yep, just keeping things in order. She had no idea how important that routine was. I started collecting everything, every deed, every receipt, every survey map. I dug into the archives, pulled out old plats, cross-checked them with current county records, and filed everything neatly into binders. I wanted no loose ends. If the HOA tried to challenge me, I would have a mountain of evidence ready to bury them in seconds. While I quietly built my arsenal of proof, the HOA built their dream. Months turned into years. I watched from a distance as my empty stretch of land transformed. Bulldozers carved roads where there used to be fields. Cranes swung beams into the sky. One by one, houses began popping up like mushrooms after storm. At first it was 10 houses, then 20, then 50. By the end of the second year, there were nearly 100 rooftops gleaming in the sun. Families moved in. I drive by slowly sometimes, just to observe. Children played in driveways. People mowed their lawns. Minivans lined the streets. Porch lights flickered on in the evenings, and holiday decorations appeared in the winters. It was surreal, an entire neighborhood growing up like a treehouse on land that legally belonged to me. The HOA board members were ecstatic. They strutted around like kings, boasting about their new development. I saw ads in the local paper. Come live in the beautiful lakeside community. They were selling homes, collecting HOA fees, holding meetings in their shiny new clubhouse, all on a foundation of pure arrogance. Every time I saw one of their smug faces, smiling for a promotional photo, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. They had no idea they were building a castle on sand. They thought they were untouchable. But I knew better. And through all of this, I had my ultimate card tucked away safely, the original deed. A crisp document, signed and sealed, resting inside a fireproof safe in my office. Sometimes, late at night, I would open that safe, pull out the deed, and run my fingers along the paper just to remind myself it was mine. No matter what the HOA said, no matter how many homes they built, that paper gave me the power to bring their empire crashing down with a single legal motion. But timing was everything. I wasn't going to waste my card too early. I wanted them so deep in the hole that climbing out would be impossible. That required patience. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake, furious at the injustice. Nights where I wanted to storm into their meetings and shout, "You're trespassing. Every single one of you." Nights where my pride screamed at me to fight back immediately. But then I would remind myself of the bigger picture. Every day they kept building was another victory for me. The trap was tightening. I just had to hold steady. By the time the last roof was finished, 96 homes stood proudly on that land. 96 families had unknowingly bought houses that weren't legally theirs. 96 sets of property lines had been drawn across soil that I still owned. 96 mortgages, all tied to a ticking time bomb they didn't even know existed. The HOA was glowing with pride. They held a ribbon-cutting ceremony, complete with balloons, speeches, and photo ops. I stood at a distance, blending in with the crowd, watching the president of the HOA snip the ribbon and declare the community a shining success. Everyone clapped. Everyone cheered. I smiled quietly to myself, because in my pocket I still held the weapon that would undo it all. The deed. The deed that never left my name. The deed that proved every square foot of that land was mine. And while the HOA puffed out their chests and bragged about their accomplishments, I knew the truth. They were celebrating on borrowed land, sinking deeper into debt with every passing day. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to flip the script. Finally, the day came when the HOA decided to flex its muscles. For years, I had been silent, watching, waiting, letting them sink deeper into their own arrogance. But arrogance has a way of catching up with people. It blinds them. And sure enough, it blinded them to the trap they'd built with their own hands. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I heard the knock. Not the friendly knock of a neighbor or the hurried rap of a delivery driver. No, this one was sharp, deliberate, full of purpose. The kind of knock that carried authority, or at least pretended to. I opened the door, and there they were. 2 men in suits, stiff ties around their necks, sunglasses that made them look like discount FBI agents. One of them carried a briefcase. The other held a thick envelope. "Mr. Daniels?" the taller one asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously, though inside, I already knew what this was about. He handed me the envelope with a smirk that screamed superiority. "We represent the Lakeside Homeowners Association. You've been served." I opened the letter right there on the porch. The words practically drip with arrogance. You are hereby ordered to cease harassing our homeowners, refrain from trespassing on HOA property, and pay damages for interfering with community operations. I actually laughed out loud. Not a nervous laugh, not a sarcastic one, but a genuine belly laugh. They had really gone there. They had the audacity to accuse me of trespassing on my own land, and then demanded I pay them for the privilege of being ignored for years. The lawyer raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed at my reaction. You think this is funny, Mr. Daniels? I folded the letter slowly, almost theatrically, and looked him dead in the eye. Funny? No. Hilarious? Absolutely. He frowned. You have 14 days to comply, or the HOA will pursue further legal action. That was it. That was the moment I had been waiting for. The one trigger that would let me finally spring the trap. My patience had paid off. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. Instead, I calmly turned and walked into my office. The lawyers exchanged glances, probably thinking I was rattled, maybe running to dig up whatever scraps of paper I had. But what I pulled out wasn't a scrap. It was the nuclear bomb. From my safe, I retrieved the thick, carefully preserved folder. Inside it was the golden ticket, the original deed, stamped, notarized, and indisputable. Alongside it, every property tax receipt for the past decade, neatly organized in chronological order. My arsenal of proof. When I came back to the doorway, I held the deed up between my fingers, letting the sunlight glint off the embossed seal. Gentlemen, I said with a calm smile, I think you are the ones trespassing. For a split second, their smug expressions faltered, but then the shorter lawyer barked out a laugh. That's your evidence. A piece of paper? Cute. The HOA acquired this land years ago. That document won't stand. Won't stand. I repeated, my voice dripping with quiet confidence. This deed is the only thing that will stand in court. You can bring all the bluffs you want, but at the end of the day, paper doesn't lie. The taller lawyer rolled his eyes, clearly unimpressed. Mr. Daniels, you don't understand the power of the HOA. We have backing, we have homeowners, we have influence in this county. If you're smart, you'll stop this nonsense before it ruins you. I couldn't help it. I chuckled again. Ruins me? No, gentlemen. This is going to ruin you. Their laughter rang hollow now, forced, the bravado of men who didn't realize they were already standing on a sinking ship. They tucked their papers back into the briefcase, muttering something about see you in court, and walked off my porch with their heads held high. But I could tell, by the stiffness in their shoulders, by the quickness of their pace, that a seed of doubt had been planted, and I was about to water it. The very next morning, I walked into my attorney's office and laid everything out on his desk. The deed, the receipts, the county maps, the tax records. My lawyer, a man with silver hair and a reputation for dismantling arrogant corporations, leaned back in his chair and whistled. They really thought they could bully you into submission, he said, flipping through the papers. Oh, this is going to be fun. I nodded. I let them build. I let them spend. I let them think they won. Now it's time to remind them who really owns the ground they're standing on. He smiled in that sly lawyer way, the kind of smile that promised fireworks in the courtroom. We'll file immediately, quietly. Let them think they're still in control for just a little longer. By the time the papers hit, they won't know what hit them. And that's exactly what we did. The lawsuit went out the next week. A clean, ironclad filing demanding recognition of my ownership and compensation for every single square foot of land they had stolen. When the HOA board received the news, their smug confidence evaporated overnight. No more laughing. No more dismissive shrugs. Panic began to seep in. I heard whispers from neighbors, board meetings going late into the night, phone calls with developers turning heated, homeowners demanding answers. They had laughed in my face, called me a trespasser, even tried to fine me. But the second the law stepped in, their house of cards started wobbling. And all it took to topple it was a single piece of paper. The deed, the same deed they mocked as cute, was about to bury them under the weight of their own arrogance. The day of the trial arrived, and it felt like the entire town had shown up to watch. The courtroom was packed, every bench filled, people leaning against the walls, some even standing in the back, just to catch a glimpse of the drama. You could feel the buzz in the air, a mix of curiosity and anticipation. After all, this wasn't just a property dispute. This was David versus Goliath. One man against an entire HOA empire. At the front, the HOA board members sat together in a tight cluster, each dressed in suits that probably cost more than some people's monthly mortgages. Their faces were smug, their posture dripping with entitlement. They whispered to each other, chuckling as if this was all a formality, just a silly nuisance they'd swat away like a fly. Beside them sat their high-priced legal team. 3 lawyers, all sharp suits, shiny shoes, and stacks of thick binders. They exuded confidence, the kind of confidence you only get when you're used to steamrolling people into submission. They acted like they owned the courtroom, leaning back in their chairs, smirking at me like I was already beaten. But I wasn't alone. My attorney sat next to me, calm and collected, with a quiet intensity in his eyes. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. His reputation was his weapon, a man known for tearing apart arrogance, with nothing more than facts and precision. The judge entered, an older man with silver hair and a gavel that seemed to weigh as much as justice itself. The room quieted instantly. "Court is now in session," he said firmly. The HOA lawyers wasted no time. Their lead attorney stood and launched into a polished opening statement. His voice was smooth, practiced, designed to sway. "Your Honor," he began confidently, "this case is nothing more than an attempted fraud. The plaintiff," he pointed toward me without even looking, "is trying to claim land that does not belong to him. The Lakeside HOA legally acquired this property years ago through development agreements, surveys, and contractual investments. Homes have been built, families have moved in, and the community is thriving. For the plaintiff to come forward now and demand ownership is not only baseless, it's disruptive and malicious." He paced as he spoke, gesturing dramatically. "This man is attempting to scam both the HOA and the hard-working families who have put their trust in us. He has no claim, no rights, and frankly, Your Honor, this lawsuit should be dismissed immediately." The board members nodded eagerly, some even smirking at the crowd as if to say, "See? We told you he's nothing." When their lawyer finished, he adjusted his tie and sat down with a satisfied grin. It was clear they thought they had already won. Then my attorney rose. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He simply picked up a folder and walked to the center of the courtroom. He paused, letting the silence build, before speaking in a calm, deliberate tone. "Your Honor, the defense claims my client is attempting a scam. They claim he has no rights, no ownership. But unlike them, we are not here with assumptions. We are here with proof." He reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, the original deed. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught the embossed seal, making it glint like a weapon. "This," he said firmly, holding it high for everyone to see, "is the original deed to the property in question. It has been in my client's name from the moment of purchase. It has never been transferred, never been sold, never been relinquished. This is not a copy. This is not a claim. This is the legal truth." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I could see the smug smiles slipping from the HOA board's faces, replaced by unease. Their lead lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But my attorney wasn't finished. He laid the deed gently on the judge's desk, then pulled out a thick binder. "And here," he continued, "are 10 years' worth of property tax receipts, paid by my client, on time, every year, without fail." He flipped the binder open, page by page, each receipt neatly dated and stamped. The sound of the pages turning echoed in the silent courtroom. The HOA claims ownership, yet they cannot produce a single tax record in their name. My client, on the other hand, has a decade of documented payments. He didn't just claim the land, he maintained it, legally and financially, year after year. The room was dead quiet now, the only sound the shuffle of papers and the steady, confident voice of my lawyer. Then came the moment of truth. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, and turned to the HOA's attorney. His voice was calm, but firm. "Do you," he asked slowly, "have proof of ownership?" The entire room seemed to hold its breath. All eyes turned to the HOA's table. The lead attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we have development maps, contracts with builders, agreements with investors." "That was not my question." The judge interrupted sharply. His tone was like a whip crack. "Do you have proof of ownership? A deed? Tax records? Anything legally binding that shows this land belongs to the HOA?" The attorney's face flushed. He glanced at his binders, at his colleagues, at the board members shifting nervously in their seats. Finally, after an agonizing pause, he admitted quietly, "No, Your Honor." The silence that followed was deafening. You could almost hear the weight of their arrogance collapsing in on itself. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression stern. "So let me make sure I understand. The plaintiff has the original deed and 10 years of tax records. The defense has assumptions, bad paperwork, and arrogance." He picked up his gavel, his voice rising with finality. "This court finds that the land in question legally belongs to the plaintiff. The HOA has built 96 homes on property that is not theirs." The gavel struck the desk with a thunderous crack. Case closed. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, even a few cheers from the back benches. The HOA board members sat frozen, their faces pale, their world crashing down around them. Homeowners buried their heads in their hands, realizing their dream houses had just turned into legal nightmares. And me? I sat there calmly, hands folded, heart pounding with satisfaction. After years of patience, years of being ignored, dismissed, and mocked, the truth had finally been spoken in the one place it mattered most. A court of law. The HOA's empire, built on arrogance, had just been buried under the weight of one piece of paper. The deed. The judge's ruling didn't just end the case. It sent shockwaves through the entire neighborhood like an earthquake no one saw coming. The moment the gavel fell, word spread like wildfire. By the time I walked out of the courthouse, half the community already knew. Phones buzzed, group chats lit up, and within hours, homeowners were gathering in driveways, front yards, and even the community park, trying to make sense of what they had just heard. Panic was the only word to describe it. Families who had just unpacked their boxes weeks earlier suddenly realized their forever homes weren't theirs at all. Couples who had drained their savings to buy into the HOA's picture-perfect dream community were now staring at a nightmare. Mortgage payments for property that legally didn't belong to them. Some cried, some shouted. Others sat in stunned silence, staring at the walls they had painted with such pride only to realize those walls stood on land they had no legal right to occupy. I remember overhearing one couple on the courthouse steps. The wife was clutching her husband's arm, whispering frantically, "What do we do now? What if we lose everything?" He didn't answer. He just stared straight ahead, pale as a ghost. Meanwhile, the HOA board, those same people who once strutted around like kings and queens of the neighborhood, were in full-blown crisis mode. Their smugness evaporated overnight. Emergency meetings were called. Lawyers were dialed up. Statements were drafted, then shredded, then drafted again. They tried to spin it, tried to reassure the homeowners, tried to act like everything was under control. But no amount of spin could erase the truth. They had built 96 homes on land they didn't own. And now they were cornered. That's when they came to me. At first, it was subtle. A friendly phone call from one of the board members, asking if maybe we could sit down and talk privately. Then it escalated. Their attorney reached out, hinting at a possible settlement, something that would make this whole thing go away. Soon, envelopes started appearing, offers of money, discreet and desperate. They wanted me to take a payout under the table, sign some papers, and pretend none of this had ever happened. But I wasn't interested in their dirty deals. I hadn't endured years of threats and fines, hadn't watched them build on my land with arrogance and contempt, just to let them slip away quietly. No, this was about more than money. This was about justice, about payback. So I rejected every offer, calmly, politely, but firmly. Each time, I told them the same thing. We'll let the court decide. And the court did. When the final ruling came down, it was like a thunderclap that shook the foundation of the entire HOA. The judge ordered them not only to acknowledge my ownership, but to compensate me for every single square foot of land they had stolen. Not just the lots under the houses, but the streets, the sidewalks, the manicured green spaces they loved to brag about in their brochures. Every inch had a price, and that price was steep. On top of that, the court recognized the years of harassment I had endured, the fines they had threatened, the trespassing letters, the intimidation tactics. It all came back to bite them. Damages were added on, piling higher and higher until the final figure was announced. Millions. The courtroom gasped when the number was read aloud. Board members sank into their chairs, their faces drained of color. Some homeowners burst into tears on the spot, realizing the HOA's reckless arrogance had not only jeopardized their homes, but also bankrupted their community. The same HOA that once fined me for trespassing was now writing checks so large it made their bank accounts bleed. The same board that had laughed in my face was now sending lawyers to beg for mercy, pleading for reduced damages, extensions, payment plans, anything. But mercy? That was a word they had never shown me. I made it clear. I wasn't in the business of rescuing bullies. They had chosen this path the moment they decided to trample over me and assume my land was theirs. They could pay every last penny. The ripple effects were brutal. Homeowners, furious and betrayed, turned on the board. The same people they had once trusted to protect their property values were now responsible for destroying them. HOA meetings turned into shouting matches. Lawsuits flew in every direction. Resignations piled up. The once mighty board fractured under the weight of scandal and financial ruin. I can still remember the sight of those board members, the ones who used to patrol the neighborhood with clipboards and smug smiles, now reduced to avoiding eye contact at the grocery store, their reputation shredded. Some skipped town altogether, too ashamed to face the very community they had once ruled with iron fists. And me, I didn't just walk away with millions of dollars. I walked away with something even sweeter, vindication. Every insult, every threat, every arrogant laugh, they all led to this moment. A moment where the balance of power shifted completely. A moment where the people who thought they could push me around learned that I was the one holding all the cards. The HOA had built an empire on arrogance, and I had torn it down with nothing more than patience, persistence, and a single piece of paper, the deed. Their empire crumbled. My victory stood tall. And as I deposited the checks, one after another, I couldn't help but think back to that day at the construction site, when the workers brushed me off, and the project manager laughed in my face. Who's laughing now? In the end, I didn't just win. I rewrote the entire story. What began as one man with a deed and a stubborn streak turned into a complete reversal of power. The HOA thought they could bulldoze over me, thought they could bury me in threats and arrogance, thought they could erase me from the picture altogether. But instead, they ended up building a 96-home neighborhood for me. Every nail they hammered, every wall they painted, every driveway they poured, it was all an unintentional investment in my future. They weren't just building houses, they were building my victory. Think about the irony for a second. These people tried to cast me as the outsider, the troublemaker, the guy who didn't belong. They waved their clipboards, wrote up their fines, laughed at my protests, and told me to get lost. But when the dust settled, when the court laid down the truth, it turned out that I was the only one who actually belonged there all along. The land was mine. The deed was mine. The power was mine. They were the trespassers, the pretenders, the ones playing make-believe while I held the one piece of paper that truly mattered. And let me tell you something. The sweetest revenge isn't rage or retaliation. It's patience. I could have rushed into court the moment I saw that first bulldozer roll onto my property. I could have fought to stop construction before a single house was built. But something inside me told me to wait. Let them pour their money into it. Let them grow bold. Let them believe they had already won. Because the higher they built their little empire, the harder the fall would be when the truth finally came crashing down. That's the lesson here. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't in stopping your enemy. It's in letting them trap themselves. The HOA dug their own grave the moment they assumed I was powerless. They built their castle on sand, and all I had to do was wait for the tide to come in. And when it did, oh, how fast it collapsed. But beyond the personal victory, there's something bigger I want people to take away from this. Always know your rights. Always keep your paperwork. Always protect what's yours. You never know when that one piece of paper, that one record you filed away years ago, will become the sword and shield that saves you. My deed wasn't just a document, it was the truth. And in the end, the truth is what set everything straight. The HOA had lawyers. They had money. They had influence. But none of that mattered when they went up against facts, against patience, against the law itself. They built on arrogance, and arrogance always collapses under its own weight. And let me make something clear. This wasn't just about me. This was about every homeowner who's ever been pushed around by an overreaching board. Every family fined for the color of their shutters. Every neighbor harassed over a fence that was 2 inches too high. Every ordinary person who has felt powerless against people who think authority gives them the right to bully. My story proves something important. You're never powerless if you know your rights. You're never weak if you have the truth on your side. And you're never outmatched if you have the patience to wait for the right moment to strike. So remember this, when you're up against arrogance, don't get angry, get smart. Anger burns fast and fizzles out. But patience is like a slow-burning fire. It stays steady. It stays strong. And when the moment comes, it can light up the whole sky. The HOA thought they had me cornered. But in the end, I was the one who had them exactly where I wanted. They weren't just paying for land. They were paying for every smug look, every fine, every letter, every sleepless night they caused. They paid for all of it, in full, with interest. And as I walked away from it all, deed in one hand and victory in the other, I realized something. Sometimes life has a sense of humor. Sometimes justice doesn't just arrive quietly. It shows up loud, dramatic, and undeniable. The very people who tried to erase me ended up building my triumph brick by brick. So the next time someone tries to bully you, belittle you, or convince you that you don't matter, remember my story. Remember that patience can turn the tables. Remember that the truth doesn't go away just because someone ignores it. And most importantly, remember this. The empire built on lies will always fall, but the one who holds the truth will always rise. I didn't just win, I flipped the script. And if it happened to me, it can happen for anyone who refuses to back down.